Hello, hello, and welcome everybody to this 2024 Google Summer Academy. The topic for today is Intro to Generative AI. Of course, it's the 20th of August, 2024. So if you're watching this a little bit later on, you may find that some of the material ends up becoming out of date quite fast. It's a very fast moving area. I'm really delighted to have so many of you with us already. Appreciate we're going to have quite a few people joining us over the next couple of moments. But with that, I'm going to hand over to my co-host, Elias, over to you to kind of get us kicked off and warmed up.
Thank you, Tom, and welcome everyone. We see people joining right now. We're going to give everyone a minute or so for them to join and start. But you're in the right place if you're here for the Intro to Generative AI class by General Assembly for the Google Summer Academy. You are in the right place. Thank you for joining. We'll get started in about a minute.
And we've already got some people saying hello in the group chat. We've got in-call messages from Blue Marble, who says, good afternoon, guys, and Melissa Fretwell as well, saying hi, everybody. We'd love it, actually, if you could say hello in the meeting chat. Let us know where you're dialing in from, but also, what is your interest? What brought you here today? And what are you looking to get out of today's session? That'd be amazing as well. And if you are watching this later on YouTube, then also let us know, perhaps in the YouTube comments as well. Okay, we've already got Fabienne who's saying hi from Zurich. Blue Marble, who is saying that you are here to outsmart AI. Interesting. We've got quite a few people, unsurprisingly perhaps from Switzerland. And I probably should have said, by the way, Elias, I probably should have said hello in a few different languages, because this is Switzerland after all, but we should probably say willkommen, bonjour, hello, and well, maybe, I mean, bienvenido is there's quite a bit of Italian there as well. I'm not quite sure about Romansh,
exactly.
But we also but we also have Stephanie in Bern.
This is how business is done nowadays. We have to say good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are in the world. For me, it's good morning. For most of the people here, it's good afternoon, but this is how it's done today. And generative AI is the trending topic today. So yes, tell us what you're interested in, what piqued your interest, what are you looking forward to today? Amazing. We're seeing people from all over the world.
Yeah, we've got Cape Town, we've got Singapore. We also have a little bit closer to where I am, N. Roberts saying hello from Reading. And we also, have many people from, we've now got, I think, 4 continents. Not doing too badly there.
I think we can get started. We have a good number of turn up now. Let's get started. All right, Tom, you can help. Yeah, thank you. Awesome. All right, guys, a bit about who's in the room. Tom and I were part of General Assembly. We've been honored by Google Zurich team to bring you this generative AI class. And a little bit about why we're here. We've been around for some time now. We've been around for about 12, 14 years now, training professionals in the most in-demand tech skills. That's our thing. That's what we do. We've graduated over 100,000 alumni since then. Probably around now we're pacing towards like 5,000 a year. And all of these professionals, they work in different industries, but with the same passion to learn the most in-demand tech skills. That's it. So what we want to tell you here is, I think we know what we're doing. It works. It's practical hands-on training. You're going to get a feel of what Gen AI is today. And towards the end, we'll share with you more resources, different paths you can take. But this is something we're passionate about, and it works, and we're glad that you're here. Let's move to the next slide, please. I want to intro you guys to Tom. Tom knows what he's doing. He lives and breathes generative AI for companies of different sizes. This is what we think is perfect for learning, because you get real hands-on experience from an expert. And he's been with GA for some time now, helping professionals from different backgrounds get familiar with generative AI, apply it to their day-to-day. So I encourage you all to ask questions as we go. And here's how we'll work around the Q&A. Use the chat to ask your questions. I will be recording those questions in a separate document as we reach the end, we'll get back to the questions. But if for some reason Tom thinks that the question is super relevant for the moment, he'll get to it. Great, but don't worry, we'll still get to your questions. We promise that. Be interactive. Ask us what you're thinking. Ask us what you want to know. And with that, I'll pass it over to Tom. Oh, and use the emojis because it's an awesome feature we're seeing right now. Tom, on to you.
Yeah, thank you so much. And yeah, a big thank you, well, to all of you for showing up today, but also to Google Atelier for hosting us today. My journey in generative AI actually started off during the pandemic. This is kind of like my generative AI origin story. So during the pandemic, I ended up founding a hyper-local e-commerce store, like a delivery business. And we ended up operating just in London. At our peak, we had over 40 local shops and producers. We had breweries, we had bakeries, we had chocolate makers, coffee makers, even we had a sake distillery. And the one problem is running the show, it was just me. And I was doing this alongside my consultancy business. And I just had a flood of new suppliers and new products coming in every week. And it was a real struggle to keep launching product page after product page after product page. So when I heard about the first generative AI apps that could help me write product pages, which were using an early large language model called GPT-3, I got really intrigued, and I've been using these tools ever since. And actually, I've folded a lot of these tools into my consultancy, Regrow, and I've now been helping lots and lots of different companies of all sizes, really, applying generative AI to their day-to-day role. Now, before we get started, I guess like a couple of tiny bits of housekeeping. We have kind of talked about there being a Q&A, but I'm very happy actually for you to ask questions throughout. This is a beginner level overview of generative AI. However, if you do want to ask more advanced questions, that's okay too. It's just we might leave some of those advanced questions towards the end. There will be a break, and the break is going to happen in about 32 minutes or thereabouts. We are also recording, so you'll receive the recording via email within a week or so. We just ask that you fill out a quick survey in order to get that particular video. The other thing to say is, this is our agenda. So we're going to start out by explaining one particular type of generative AI, but it is the type that is getting everybody excited, large language models. We're then going to talk about the benefits and limitations of large language models. We'll talk about how you train an LLM. Then we'll talk about how you might understand and identify biases. We'll give you some guiding principles for ethical AI use. Then we'll move into some best practices for writing effective prompts before moving into a couple of real-world examples of AI use cases. And then we'll have a bit of a chance to do a live AI demo before we then answer any questions and questions that kind of pop up. And I've got to say, with these sessions, we end up usually with a lot of questions. So please do ask all of your questions. And we usually have a fairly quick fire session at the end. We want you to keep on asking those questions, and we'll kind of move through as many of them as possible. I will keep an eye on the in-call messages, so hopefully we can answer some of those questions in stream, as it were. But look, let's now dive in, and let's start to go deep into large language models and explain what these things are and why they're useful. Before we dive fully into that particular topic, I just want to kind of broaden things out a little bit. And I want you to let me know in the meeting chat, which I'm staring at intently right now. I want to know, first of all, what comes to mind when you hear the words artificial intelligence or AI. I want you to I guess just be as open-minded. There is no wrong answer for this. I just want to know what do you think about when you think about AI? Yeah, Julie so far straight in there with Terminator. Actually, that probably was the first thing I used to always think of when I thought about AI. Skynet, Miguel says sci-fi. Burnt is going in there with specific type of AI model, neural networks. Sasha is saying LLMs. Kaya is saying robots. Stephanie, opportunities. We've got pattern recognition, automation, robots, assistants. We actually have there a little raised hand there from Roger. And just because I'm curious, I'm just going to hit open queue there. So I don't know. Yeah, do you want to sort of come off mute there? Was there something you wanted to say there, Roger, at all? No worries if not. You are very welcome to kind of speak up if you'd like to kind of speak up. But maybe you just accidentally raised your hand there. Who knows? But look, going back to the meeting chat, we've got pattern recognition, we've got automation. Melissa says assistant, some way of helping us out. Claudio's going straight back in there. We're talking about The Matrix, that sci-fi film. Or who knows, maybe, Claudio, you're actually thinking about the underlying maths, because actually some of the underlying maths of AI involves multiplying matrices and things like that. Bjorn is saying productivity. Ricardo is saying prediction. We've got understanding data patterns, and that is very much a really core thing here. It is all about pattern recognition. Octavian saying it's a tool. I think that's very important, actually, to say that these AIs, they are for now just tools, and they can be used well, or they can be used badly. And I think that's a really important thing. RC Snoy is saying 2024, because yes, this is probably one of the peak years thus far for AI. Sasha is saying assistance, support. Roberto, here we go. Finally, we have some sort of slightly more pessimistic ideas that AI might be somehow replacing humans. We've got N. Roberts, productivity assistant. We've got War Games 1983, that kind of sci-fi dystopian idea that maybe we could end up with some kind of dystopian end game for humanity. And we've got finally Anita, who's just saying hello from Germany. Hello back to Germany. And yes, also Katya, the last invention by humanity. Now, look, there are many things going on there. We've got everything from this idea around sci-fi through to perhaps this idea that actually these are just tools to help us with productivity, through to these kind of fears we have that perhaps AI could present an existential threat. I think for today, what I'd like us to do is rein all of that back and really go back to the origins of this term. And in actual fact, its inventor, in the end, didn't think that it was a very useful way of talking about this field, because this idea of intelligence leads us all too often to think of it being an intelligence, something with cognition, something with consciousness. Whereas actually, really, these are, I suppose, machine-based systems that can, for a given set of human-derived or defined objectives, make predictions, recommendations, or perhaps give us some creativity. And they end up using both machine and human-based inputs in some kind of automated manner. We see here things like problem-solving, pattern recognition, and maybe even some decision-making using algorithms, data, and statistical models. And kind of the important thing to say here, everyone, is that we end up, I suppose in many cases, seeing AI as being this very broad field. And it actually takes in many different areas. It takes in expert systems, where it's experts that program using rules. It takes in predictive machine learning, so things like Gmail being able to predict whether an email is spam or not spam. But then it also takes in generative AI, which is what we're here to talk about today. And generative AI only became possible because of a kind of subset of artificial intelligence, which is called deep learning. So it's this subset of machine learning that focuses on using neural networks, which I think is actually something that earlier on Bernd mentioned, okay? And these neural networks end up having many, many layers, hence this idea of them being deep, to model and understand complex patterns and relationships within data. You know, if I kind of, I'm going to draw a really bad diagram here on this slide here. Hopefully you can see it, but if you imagine that actually in our brains, we have these particular cells called neurons. This is, by the way, a gross simplification. If you imagine then that there are loads and loads of different connections, okay, between all of our different neurons, we can kind of recreate a very similar thing with computers. And in fact, we've been trying to do this for more than 60 years, strangely enough. It turned out, though, that this was much more complicated than we thought. And it took us the best part of 60 or 70 years to be able to get the kind of computing power that we were going to need to make this work at scale. And that's what deep learning is. It's this idea that we create artificial neural networks like what you see kind of in front of you here, but on a much, much kind of vaster scale. And really, I would say since 2012, this is what has given rise to all of the most amazing advances that we've seen over, should we say, the last 12 years, including this idea that you can open up Google Photos and maybe it automatically is able to recognize faces in the data. Do you know what, everybody? It can even recognize, I've got identical twin daughters. Google Photos can almost flawlessly recognize which is which. As long as I label just a few of their faces, it learns and it's able to accurately say, this is your eldest twin daughter, this is your youngest twin daughter, even though they're identical. Now, as well as deep learning, we also then have a subset of this, which is generative AI, because with deep learning, initially, we would use this, for example, to perhaps recognize what's going on in a particular photo, what's going on in a video. We could also, if you like, transcribe a YouTube video and automatically have hopefully quite accurate transcriptions of what somebody is saying when they are speaking. But what was really amazing was when we started to turn this around. And instead of initial deep learning, which would take us from, say, image to text, or video to text, or audio to text, with generative AI, we could turn this around, okay? And we could actually go from text to image, or text to video, or indeed text to text. So this is a type of artificial intelligence that is capable of creating new, quote unquote, original content, okay? Because they are only original in the sense that they are unique, never before seen. They are still derivative based on the training data. And this can be images, music, and text. But crucially, this is based on the patterns and styles that the generative AI has already learned from an existing data set, a whole bunch of data sets, okay? Now, it turns out that actually we started out initially with some fairly basic generative AI. The first example I remember was Google Deep Dream, it was called, and it was a way of creating these quite dreamlike artificial, if you like, images, these kind of images that were almost turning the training data on its head. And I might show you actually a little bit later on what some of those images look like. But then we started moving into, if you like, these kind of convolutional neural networks that helped us generate images And then finally, 7 years ago, some Google researchers created this architecture called transformer architecture. And these models were capable of processing and generating natural language text, and then audio, images, and even video by training on vast amounts of data and inferring patterns. The most kind of dramatic of these turned out to have been large language models. Okay, so actually Google created this architecture of transformer models, but then it ended up being OpenAI initially, who picked up the ball and then created the earliest sort of large language models, as we call them, which initially was GPT-2 and GPT-3. But as we'll see, this has now proliferated into a whole range of different LLMs, and now large multimodal models as well. So let me just quickly clear all of that and move on to the next slide. The interesting thing, though, about these large language models, which I'm sure many of us have used, and which I'm sure many of you will have kind of experienced for the first time, and almost thought, wow, this is so magical. The really interesting thing about them is that at a very high level, they're just an exercise in statistics. And it essentially generates their responses one word, or even, as we might call it, one token at a time based on probability. So I'm just going to very quickly, kind of show you what I might mean. So if I say something like LLMs like Chat GPT generates, what I actually end up doing is I end up breaking this sentence into tokens. And so actually the tokens might end up looking more like L, L, M, and then like might be one word, and then chat might be one token, and then GPT might be one token, and then generate itself might be essentially one word. And then what happens is we end up changing those tokens, as we call them, into numbers. And we actually have a dictionary of all of those different tokens. So maybe L might be, I don't know, number 123 or something. And so we change all of that into 123, 123. Maybe this is 156. Maybe this is 6. Maybe like ends up being, I'm just creating fake numbers here. But what we end up with actually is just a whole array of different numbers like this. And essentially what we are then doing is feeding these numbers into the model, and the model then ends up predicting what is the next token. Okay, and the next token might get spat back to us, and it might be 4597. Just in case you are sharing something with us, we only see the presentation. Okay, is it only when it's only when I hit enter on the text box. Thank you so much, everybody. I'm so sorry for that. But look, there you go. You can now see the numbers. What I'll have to do then is I'll have to do something like this and go something like this. This is what I showed you originally. LLMs like Chat GPT generates. Okay, and so essentially what I've done there is I've then, and I'll do a little line and shape like this, a little arrow. LLM might get actually broken into what are called 4 different tokens like this. Like would be its own token, which might be something like 4568. ChatGPT like this, generate like this. What I'm trying to say here is that everything gets turned into a series of numbers. And then the model, strangely enough, only knows. Oh, hello, Marina. It only knows how to predict the next number. And then strangely enough, when we turn that number back into a token, it turns out that actually where it says 4597, that might then get turned back, who knows, maybe into a word like there, because that's the next most likely number to show up. So actually, it's strange, But large language models don't actually know, quote unquote, what the next word they are predicting is. They just know what the next token is, which is kind of a bit of a strange thing for us to get our head around. But when we actually look at what this looks like in practice, we might see that you end up with a sentence like, the promise of large language models is that they, and then the next token might be can, it might be will, it might be are, it might be capture, it might be could, and the model generates, if you like, a probability that it's going to be one of those 5 tokens. The most interesting thing, though, is that there's a bit of randomness, okay? That means that we don't get the same answer every time. And oftentimes the model will actually predict a different token. And as a consequence of that, we actually end up, weirdly, with a much more creative model than if we always picked the next most likely token. And this is why, strangely enough, unlike other types of, if you like, statistical models, this particular type of model can actually weirdly be very good at doing creative tasks, and strangely, very bad at doing certain tasks that computers are traditionally good at, like maths. So look, the benefits of LLMs are that they're great at generating coherent, well-written text. They're also, strangely enough, very good at knowing a huge amount about the world, because let's say a large language model like Gemini Advanced or Gemini Pro, it has been trained pretty much on the entire internet, right? So Google always crawls the internet to see what is on the internet to update its search engine. Google can then train the model with everything that is on the internet, with everything that is on YouTube and is published publicly, with everything that is in Google Books that Google has digitized and that they have the rights to. And so what happens is this model compresses all of Wikipedia, all of Reddit, all of Twitter, all of any content that's been licensed, like Google Books, anything on Google Scholar. And what happens is it compresses all of the world's information into a much smaller space. And so strangely enough, if you use one of the open source models offline, if you're on an aeroplane, you can actually have a 5 gigabyte model running on your local machine. And strangely enough, it knows so much about the world, even though it's kind of compressed all of this information into a relatively small file. The other benefit is that they can be fine-tuned to tasks like coding or tasks like being a helpful assistant, and they can perform many, but not all tasks to near human standard. In some cases, they can even exceed human standard in some certain tasks. So Miguel is asking, how do other companies like ChatGPT get access to all of that information available on the internet? So Miguel, there's actually a service called Common Crawl. Common Crawl makes a lot of this, a lot of these data sets available open source. So Common Crawl provides all of this data almost to anybody who would like to use it. You, Miguel, could actually go and download, if you wanted to, the entirety of the internet from one of their servers. It might take you a little bit of time to be able to do that for your local machine, and you might not quite have the space, but in theory, you could actually do that. And they crawl the web every 2 months or so and make it open to everybody. There are also loads and loads of other open source data sets. And actually, many of the kind of advances that we've all enjoyed over the last 12, 14 years, thanks to the work of academics like Fei-Fei Li, who created data sets like ImageNet which is an open source data set that she created with her students, which is like an amazing labeled set of photos of almost anything that you can think of that had been labeled with everything, painstakingly labeled with everything that was in the photo. So there's loads and loads of data sets that are publicly available. However, Miguel, in some cases, companies are actually illegally or in a gray area scraping other companies' data. There's a lot of shady stuff that ends up happening. Google actually probably has a better access than some of these other companies. I won't say which companies, but I will say that some of the other companies are not being quite as ethical, shall we say, mentioning no names. So the other thing to say is that large language models tend to have a high level of uptime, and they are nearly 24/7. And these are like some of the benefits. Some of the limitations, which we may perhaps be aware of, is that they tend to be prone to hallucinations. And the reason for this is that partly we have fine-tuned them to always give a confident answer, because that is what is most helpful to us. But the limitations are that in the same way that many of us actually, if we're in a professional context and we don't have the exact information to hand, in the same way that many of us will maybe get something slightly wrong about maybe the world. Like, for example, right now, I could say, for example, Anita, who's on the call, yeah, Anita, I remember Anita is dialing in from Austria. Now, that's not strictly true, because if I look and I see she told me previously she dialed in from Germany, but maybe in my head, I compressed this information. And I said to myself, well, I remember there was somebody called Anita, and she dialed in from a German-speaking country. I'm pretty sure there were a bunch of people who said they were in Austria, so maybe Anita was in Austria. These are the kind of mental shortcuts that our brains take. These large language models do the same thing. The difference is that whereas I might say, okay, Anita, I think she was from Austria, but actually maybe she was from Germany. Anyway, it doesn't really matter. Large language models are, by their design, they're designed to be overconfident, and they are just there to predict the next most likely token. And so they will say perhaps Austria, because maybe in the training data, that was the most likely next token for people called Anita in the training data. We don't know. This is the strange thing. Blue, you've said why, by the way. I don't know if you could maybe expand on that particular comment there, or question rather. If you can expand on that a little bit more, then I'll be really, really happy to kind of go into more depth. The thing that also we're kind of realizing is that large language models at the moment, they lack true reasoning. Okay, so Blue is actually saying, why not set it right from the beginning? For example, no hallucinations. So it's a great question, Blue. The trouble is that the architecture of this transformer architecture and the large language model implementation of that architecture, it means that we have to compress information. We cannot store every last piece of information accurately. I don't want to kind of go too much into the weeds right now, Blue, but I will probably go into more depth at the end. But hallucinations are what we might commonly call at the moment like a feature, not a bug, because we can essentially, yeah, compression says it all properly. Yeah. The thing is, we can actually get around hallucinations by what we might call scaffolding. There are different ways that we can get around these hallucinations, but we just have to remember that out of the box, these hallucinations, they just happen. Now, we do this too. We as human beings, we do this as well, but we know we have our own scaffolding, if you will, for how we can reduce uncertainty. One of the ways that we can do this is we can, if we're not sure about something, like if I'm not sure which country Anita comes from, I can just not mention it. Equally, I can just very, very quickly look it up in the meeting chat. And the other thing that I can do is I can actually maybe get better over time at remembering things that are kind of working on my memory. And we have analogous techniques that we might call scaffolding that are also available to large language models. And we'll talk about what some of those are a little bit later on. But we kind of sometimes see that that large language models, they lack true reasoning. They do pattern matching more often than they properly reason. So, for example, if I ask a large language model if I say to a large language model, hey, I'm a farmer and I've got a fox and I've got a bag of grain and a boat, what's the best way to get the fox and the box of grain across the river? Instead of saying, you'll be fine, the grain is in a box, foxes don't eat grain. Instead of saying that, instead of thinking it through, it will pattern match. And it will say, oh, this looks exactly like that riddle with the fox and the chicken in the bag of grain. So I'm going to actually give a similar answer to that. So they don't actually think things through. Because if you like, large language models are always speaking off the cuff. They don't actually think things through. They're literally speaking without thinking. They're using, if you know, system 1 and system 2 thinking, or thinking fast and thinking slow, they're using system 1 thinking. They are thinking fast. They're not thinking things through. That's the kind of way that I would describe it. Now, also, they require careful prompting. Their answers may be homogeneous, and it takes a lot of experience to use large language models effectively. And I like, to kind of go back through this list again, I actually like to think they're a little bit like politicians. They're prone to making stuff up while sounding massively overconfident. They're incapable of being truly rational. They require careful prompting. And if you've never worked in politics, trust me, politicians are under careful instructions. The answers often are a little bit samey. And okay, for the last one, maybe the analogy perhaps breaks down. I'm not going to lie there. But actually, it does take a lot of experience of finding out what works and what doesn't work to use them effectively. There aren't many manuals, should we say, for how to use large language models yet. And so it does require a lot of experimentation. I would also recommend, going on further courses, finding out a lot more, about how to use them effectively. Okay, so in the next section, we're going to talk about bias. But before we get to that, I just want to talk for the last couple of moments before we have a very quick break. I just want to talk about how you go about training a large language model. And although large language models are amazing because they don't just look at the immediate neighbors of words, they understand the context of a word buried several paragraphs deep in the training data. What is really great is that they learn the structure, the patterns, and the common knowledge. And they do this by assigning values to sequences of letters, which we saw earlier on, known as tokens. And what it does is it then uses the knowledge of patterns, as we said, to predict the next word in a sentence or token in a sequence. But what we're essentially doing here is we're exposing the large language model to a vast amount of text and other data, and it's learning the relationship between those tokens. Now imagine if instead of, like, I'm just drawing this kind of these kind of little circles here to represent the neural network. Now, what I'm showing you right here is the simplest one you can possibly imagine, which has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different weights. Okay, so there are 6 different weights, is what we'll call it in this little neural network. Now, imagine if instead of 6 different weights, we had 1 trillion different weights. And imagine if each time we showed a single token, like this word here, work. Okay, so imagine if every single time we showed it this word work, and if we showed it this word work or token work in the context of an entire paragraph or article, imagine if every single time we showed it a single token, it would slightly adjust the strength of the weights of the entire model. And every time we did that, it would just adjust every single weight, all trillion weights at the same time. How magical would that be? That's kind of crazy, isn't it? And so what we're then doing is we're then adjusting all of those weights through the entirety of, should we say, maybe 50, 60, 70, 80 petabytes of data, like an inordinate amount of data. But each time we're only showing it a small number of tokens, and we're showing it a word like work, and we're showing it in the context of the entirety of that particular article or video or book or whatever else. That's the kind of crazy thing about this kind of pre-training, and the crazy thing about it learning the relationship between tokens. Then, once we've done that, the next thing that we would then do is we would then fine-tune the model, okay, and we then train it on a much smaller task-specific data set, and we show it some ideal questions and some ideal answers to those questions. And this is where it learns, for example, how to code effectively, or it learns, for example, how to be a helpful assistant. So what we then do is it is still updating the model weights, but it's getting, better and better at a specific task, like being a helpful assistant, or it's getting better at perhaps, I don't know, being a coding assistant. Then in the final section, we use something called reinforcement learning from human feedback. And this is where we can say, this as a human, we can say, this is a good response or this is a bad response. And this is where we can actually start reducing some of those hallucinations. And this is where as well, we can stop it from getting dumber, not smarter over time. So this is where we then say, look, actually, this hallucinated answer, this is bad. So actually, where this has been like a hallucinated answer, actually, we want to reduce the weight of that one there. And let's rebuild that. And this, by the way, is a gross simplification. Let's rebuild that. And let's give it some human feedback. And there we go. We have like a nicer, oh, the diagram is doing something weird there, everybody. But this is essentially a stage where we help the model become more friendly, more helpful, but also less bigoted. This is where we can start to remove some biases. Although ultimately, when you get feedback from enough people at this stage, you get something that appears to be designed by committee. Now, look, we are now ready to go to a 5-minute break. I'm going to quickly clear the little annotation there. And what we're going to do is we're going to have a little 5-minute break, and then we're going to come back and we're going to talk about maybe kind of have a recap of how we train a large language model, and then we're going to dive into talking about bias. But we're going to give you 5 minutes. So we'll see you back here in, I suppose, just a moment. And let me just quickly press play on this video. Oh, I'm going to maybe turn that volume down a little bit. There we go. There we are. Lovely stuff. So we'll see you in 4 minutes and 50 seconds. Okay. Well, that is quite the ending there to that particular video. Okay, so welcome back, everybody. And if you are on the Google Meet call, then please do make your way back to your screens and we will get started once again. Do give me a little thumbs up or maybe some other kind of emoji. Who knows? Maybe a little sort of, I don't know, maybe a little love heart or something. I'm going to do a little love heart. There we go. All kinds of great emojis there. Look at that. Whoa. That was quite something. Okay, so we are now going to continue with maybe actually just I guess like just a quick recap on these three elements there: pre-training, as well as fine-tuning, and RLHF. So actually, what I want to sort of highlight to you at this stage is that after pre-training, strangely enough, if we do nothing at this stage, then large language models, they kind of end up reflecting a lot of the biases in the training data. They end up finishing sentences rather than answering questions. And so they're a little bit like a very well-read yet drunk, bigoted uncle that you might kind of meet during the holidays or something. So at this stage, they're very much not ready for the big time, and they will, if there's harmful content in the training data, they will reproduce that harmful content. So this is why we then need these next two stages with fine-tuning, kind of like adapting the pre-trained knowledge to perform well on a specific task. And there is maybe a really nice set of data, like you can see here in this example. So you can see here in this example, Marv is a factual chatbot. It's also sarcastic. Imagine we wanted to fine-tune our model to be a sarcastic chatbot. We would show it some examples of what a sarcastic answer would look like. So like here we've got, what's the capital of France? And the assistant then says, oh, it's Paris, a little known city. You might have seen it mentioned in a few hundred films, books, and paintings. So essentially, if we showed it enough example questions and answers, we could turn it into a super sarcastic chatbot. Equally, we could turn it into a very helpful coding assistant, whatever else. But still at this stage, there might be a lot of bias. There might be some unhelpfulness, should we say. There's, yeah, lots and lots maybe going on here that we need to very carefully think about. Okay, so the last kind of part of the training is this thing that we call reinforcement learning from human feedback. And this essentially initially has real users, initially experts in their field, rate, if you like, answers, helping it kind of become a little bit more friendly, a lot more helpful, and at this stage, hopefully, much less racist or sexist. There will still, though, be kind of some other biases that might still at this stage get introduced. And that kind of leads us on to the next little section here, which is bias in generative AI. Because actually, it turns out that bias can creep in at any stage, not just in these kind of earlier stages of training. It turns out that actually bias can emerge as well based on the way that we might prompt. So researchers at the University of Waterloo wanted to study the impact that prompts had on the outputs that they received from ChatGPT. And they found that actually prompts had a significant impact on ChatGPT's outputs. So they tested 3 prompts to compare. And I want you to tell me in the meeting chat, which one do you think received the least biased output? Was it 1, explain why socially assistive robots are an effective treatment for older adults with dementia? Was it 2, are socially assistive robots an effective treatment for older adults with dementia? Or was it 3, what are the benefits and drawbacks of socially assistive robots as a treatment for older adults with dementia. So yeah, do let us know what you think in the meeting chat. We're already starting to have a few answers come through, and it does seem as if the threes have it. Most people are saying 3, a few people saying 2. But yes, number 3 is actually, it turned out in the study, gave the least biased output as measured by the researchers, but also as measured by other types of AI to measure kind of bias and stuff. So number 1, explain why socially assisted robots. Essentially, this prompt asks for an explanation as to why it is effective. And so at this stage, it's likely that the LLM will go, okay, you've asked me to explain why they're an effective treatment. I'm not going to explain why they're not an effective treatment if it turns out that actually that is the case. They're not actually an effective treatment. With the second one, it's worked in a way that it will try and cause the LLM to make a decision one way or another, and then proceed to justify its choice. Whereas with the third option, it's actually forcing the large language model to consider both sides of the issue and present details for both before potentially then settling on an answer. And you might say, well, actually, both siding is not a helpful thing to do. And perhaps in some cases, maybe like, I don't know, maybe, for example, for emotive topics like World War II or something, maybe it would not be a good idea for a human to do this. But actually, if you ask a large language model to consider both sides of a topic, you actually end up with a better response, and you end up with a less biased response, even if it's very clear to us as humans which side, is the kind of correct and safe side. So those are kind of some initial ideas. We're now going to look at some guiding principles for ethical AI use. And in particular, we're going to talk about some best practices for using large language models. So we definitely need to be very mindful of hallucinations. We should know that they can show up when we use large language models. We should also recognize the fact that biased outputs may well emerge. I often use large language models to help me generate stories for my twin daughters. They ask, I mean, if they could choose what happened every day on holiday that we just went on, they would choose for me to tell stories for 4 hours in a row. They just love stories so much, and I end up having to rack my brains for new ideas for stories. So I use large language models to help me. But if I don't include in my prompts, make sure to include gender diversity in the outputs. The stories always end up being a lot more male focused. And my daughters tell me off for this, right? Because they don't want to hear all about male protagonists all the time. So actually, I have to include that in my prompt in order to use that effectively. And the same will go for any other task that you might use them for. So you have to stay very, very critical and conscious. And especially if you're using large language models in some kind of production environment, you might need to use another type of AI model to help check for bias, to kind of put in place guardrails. We also need to make sure that we understand that they can be bad at maths, unless they have this scaffolding, unless they have the ability to use tools, which is something that we will kind of explore a little bit later on. They also tend to have limited access to real-time information, although that's not the case for every LLM. Gemini Advanced, for example, can check Google and will be able to kind of sense check any information. But there are lots of large language models out there that don't have the ability to search and check on real-time information. The thing is that we also are going to need to make sure that we fact check any claims that come out. And we also are going to need to verify any information that kind of gets brought in. They don't tend to know everything. And as we said before, they kind of compress a lot of the information. So we need to fact check using reliable sources. In terms of using generative AI, we just wanted to talk through not an exhaustive list, but some kind of interesting list, should we say, of some of the popular models. And it's important to say that there are now, I would say, probably 4 or 5 frontier models. So by frontier model, I mean these are the models that are best in class, that are kind of state of the art. And I'm not even sure I've kept this slide 100% up to date, so I'll have to check in just a moment if I have. But we essentially have from OpenAI, we have GPT-4o is their best in class model. And if I kind of, there we go, kind of highlight some of the models that are best in class, that will be helpful. Microsoft Copilot Pro is also powered by OpenAI. They are in the process of updating, and they will actually have GPT-4 powering Copilot Pro, but they've been a little bit behind the curve recently. Anthropic is another company you may have heard of. Their best-in-class model right now is called Claude 3 Sonnet 1.5. And again, that is very much kind of best in class. And I would say that all of these models I'm mentioning, these are all pretty much at the same level now. Google has a model called Gemini 1.5 Pro, soon to be, if you like, superseded by Gemini 1.5 Ultra. But this is Google's best-in-class model, and again, performs at a very, very similar level, as does Meta's Llama 3.1. So we've essentially got GPT-4o. We also have Claude Sonnet. I think it's got a Claude 3 Sonnet, and it gets very complicated, everybody remembering all of these. We've got Gemini 1.5 Pro. We've got Llama 3.1. And all 4 of these models are actually performing at a very, very similar level. But you'll kind of explore and try out some of the different interfaces. And it just depends on what your use case is as to which of these models is going to be most effective for you. We would also say that we are currently waiting for, if you like, the next class of model. And all of the kind of big AI research labs are working on what we might call the kind of next generation, the 5th generation of large language models. We're quite excited to see where these lead us, where these go. There's been some skepticism as to whether we will see a step change or not. But quietly, from what I'm hearing, it's just taking us a little bit longer, because there tends to be 1.5 to 2 years to build the necessary infrastructure to train this next generation. So William Beck, what about Gemini from Google? It's right there. Sorry, I'm maybe I'm a couple of minutes behind there in the chat. Perplexity, Marcus, is a tool that is powered by other models. So quite often you'll hear about tools like Perplexity. You'll hear about tools like I don't know, copy.ai. A lot of these tools are actually using these foundational models, and essentially every time a new model comes along, the likes of Perplexity will pick up these models and plug these new models in to improve the quality of their product. However, companies like Perplexity run the risk of having their product superseded by the next generation of large language models, which are kind of called multimodal language models. William, I do not have a list of AI image generation suppliers right now, but to me, the best in class is definitely Midjourney. Midjourney is head and shoulders for now above everything else, although the next generation of multimodal models are looking really promising. And so you will see the likes of Gemini and Llama and ChatGPT producing very, very good images using the same technology behind LLMs, okay? So let's clear all that there. 5 rules for writing good prompts. We want you to be clear and specific. You need to specify format and length. It's good to ask for multiple perspectives. You need to incorporate priming statements, and it is important to refine and experiment as you go through. So what do we mean by each of these? Be clear and specific. If you, for example, want to know, tell me about replacing a fuse, it's probably not a good idea to ask that specific question because it's going to give you a very, very generic answer. And you're probably better off going to YouTube and asking that very same question and finding the right video for you. However, if you say, provide a step-by-step guide on how to replace the fuse in the switch connecting my Lamona oven, which is no longer working, I live in Singapore. Ask me to clarify if you need information. That level of clarity and specificity is going to allow the model to give you a much, much better answer that is going to draw on all of its knowledge about how you replace a fuse of a Lamona oven, what the context is for Singapore, and it will very likely be able to give you a much better answer than perhaps one that exists out there already, because I doubt very much that there is a step-by-step guide that exists out there on the web for this specific use case. I doubt that there's a YouTube video that kind of gives you this specific use case. So that clarity and specificity is really, really important. Also, really good idea to specify the format and length. And you can actually get large language models now to, for example, give you a table that could be easily pasted into Excel or into Google Sheets. So I'm actually going to copy some of these examples so that we can actually, maybe later on I'm going to kind of take you through some of these examples. Let me just go back to this one as well. And I'm just going to very quickly, there we go, grab those so I can kind of take you through some of those examples. So asking for multiple perspectives is going to be very helpful. What are your thoughts on social media? That is way, way, way too wishy-washy. Much better to say, present 2 contrasting arguments regarding the impact of social media on society, considering both positive and negative effects. And look, I've also put in some context there. I am researching a blog post aimed at parents of US teens. That's going to give you a much, much, much better answer there. Also, we want priming statements. Talk about remote work. Well, it's just going to talk about remote work in general, and it's probably going to regurgitate something very similar to what you would find on the Wikipedia page for this topic. Instead, we might want to get more specific and say, in recent years, there's been a significant shift towards remote work. Discuss the advantages and disadvantages of this trend. Bring in research from scientific papers. That is a much, much, much better prompt. And it's going to give us, hopefully, some kind of nice research that the LLM can go off and grab for us. That'd be a really, really awesome thing. Oh, Miguel, you said perhaps I missed it, but does the system, so Gemini, for example, keep track of your info that you share also for future answers? Like when saying you live in Singapore, that's a great question. I'm actually going to come back to that one a little bit later on. And Katya, you've got some kind of insight there. ChatGPT told me that he knows only the information I shared within the same conversation. Katya, that is no longer 100% strictly true, because actually some LLMs are starting to build what's called memory, and they're going to start to store information between chats. The thing is that ChatGPT doesn't know that this is what happens just yet. William Buck says ChatGPT forgets everything I wrote in the past. That may be the case right now, but it won't necessarily be the case in the future. So yeah, I'm going to show you a little bit later on some kind of insights there that might be kind of quite helpful there for showing us what happens. Okay, great. I am going to go back to our feature presentation and get back on task, but keep those questions coming because I know we're going to be able to answer all of them quickfire a little bit at the end. It's also worth it refining and experimenting. Don't always accept the first answer. If you were to write a poem about nature and it didn't come back quite right, maybe try again and say compose a descriptive poem, 12 to 16 lines that captures the beauty of a serene forest. And then if still that's not quite good enough, then go back and edit your prompt and give it more. Very much recommend that. But to summarize though, when you're using LLMs at work, remember that these tools are just tools. They are not truly intelligent. Okay, they are just predictive machines. They're very good. They're very helpful, but they are just tools. Next, I can't stress this enough. Be specific and clear in your prompts. Give the model as much information as possible. Most of them now have very large context windows. In fact, the very latest Google model, you can give it 2 million tokens, okay, which means you can give it an entire book and it will be able to draw on this information. So give it a lot of information. You do, however, need to remember that LLMs are not oracles, and you must make sure you don't overshare. Keep data privacy in mind. That is very, very, very important. Blue Marble, how can you tell AI to keep data private? Great question, and one that we will come back to in the Q&A. So I'm sure we're noting all of these questions down, and I will come back to them a little bit later on. A couple of real-world AI examples that I think are quite exciting. So I think the kind of context here is that AI is going to disrupt a lot of industries, but we do need to think about it as a productivity lift rather than being a replacement for human beings. And I think some companies are not paying attention to this fully. But having a look at the next example, this is one particular use case that we think is really quite exciting. And this is this company, Be My Eyes, that have now developed a virtual volunteer within their app that can generate the same level of context and understanding as a human volunteer for a blind or partially sighted person. And this is really, really quite something. Okay, so I'm going to play this video. I'm not going to play you the whole video, but this shows you the power of what happens when you give a large language model not only access to text, but also access to audio from your phone's camera, and also access to video from the phone's video camera as well. So let's just quickly watch what happens. Remember, this is a demo. This isn't necessarily exactly what is happening already, but this will be the kind of thing that will be possible in the future.
I even know when a taxi is coming with its orange light on. I think I'll hail it to get home.
Yes, I spotted one just now. It's heading your way on the left side of the road. Get ready to wave it down. Great job hailing that taxi. It looks like you're all set to go. That's a good dog right there, leading the way into the taxi. Safe travels.
So there we go. Kind of quite an amazing use case there. Yeah, nice applause there from Miko. So the very interesting thing now is that Google, OpenAI, Anthropic, and others are now making small enough large language models that they can run natively on device. And so whereas that demo would require a high latency internet connection, soon our phones, our devices are going to be able to perform those kinds of tasks on device, which is kind of really, really quite something. So next up, there are some not so good examples. Okay, so ChatGPT claims that a law professor had been at the center of a sexual harassment scandal and even cited the Washington Post as a source that didn't exist as a source. We have to be very, very conscious that these things can happen. There was also a judge in Pakistan that was asking ChatGPT legal questions before making decisions in civil and criminal cases without realizing it could hallucinate. And yes, it is estimated that 10% of data that employees paste into ChatGPT is confidential. Now, ChatGPT by default allows OpenAI to train on your data. Other models like Google Gemini have perhaps stricter data controls by default. Generally speaking, most large language models, if you are not paying for it, then in some cases your data may end up being used. So you need to really, really watch the small print, okay? So key takeaways: AI is more than LLMs. AI is a tool, and AI should be used responsibly. And just so you know, by the way, we're going to give you all of these slides. As long as you complete the feedback link, we're going to give you all of these slides, or indeed you'll be able to watch them back on the video, or you might actually be watching the video already. We're now going to just very, very quickly leave the presentation just for a very, very quick demo, just so you might be able to understand the art of the possible, before we then have a quick Q&A, and before we kind of find out a little bit more about what else might be on offer as part of the training journey. Got some more questions and comments coming in. I'm at the beginning of my AI journey. Which tool would you advise to get the pro version? Also, when thinking about which offers the most features like memory, or for which you can get the most training offers, etc. We'll catch you. There's no time like the present to have a little look at some of the different tools. And yeah, Ricardo, I've had hallucinations to the point of making up peer-reviewed article. Yeah, it's really, really important to be very mindful of this stuff. But look, I'm going to very quickly switch over my screen, and I'm going to switch over to a little window where I have access to Gemini Advanced. And you'll see here that this is the paid for version. You can see that I've kind of got Gemini Advanced picked here. This is the paid for version of Google Gemini. And I've actually got a friend who has asked me to provide, well, to help her out actually with her CV. And so you'll see here I can actually add from Drive, or I can upload some files. And so I'm just going to very quickly go to friend CV, and I'm just going to insert this. This is her existing CV. And I'm also going to add in the text from the job description. Okay, so the job description, I've just copy pasted this from a web page. And so there we go. I've got this job description. We're seeking a highly organized and proactive PA. And what I'm now going to do is I'm just going to write in here, please help rewrite the CV to be more suitable for this job description. Here we go, like this. And then what I'm going to just very, very quickly do is I'm just going to put this job description in between some backticks, just to let the large language model know this is what I want it to look at. And then I'm going to say, please feel free to be critical and think step by step. Okay, so I'm now going to hit enter on that. And this is where we're adding lots to this context window. And it's saying the provided CV has a wealth of experience, but it's formatted for the yachting industry, which is very, very true. And so now it's basically rewriting her CV and actually making it much more succinct and much more, I suppose, relevant to the job description that we've just seen there. And it's still got the sources there. But look, I can now, if I want to, say this is a good response or bad response to do a bit of human feedback. I can also share and export it. So I could now actually export this to docs. So it's now creating that document, and I can go and open docs, and now I can go in here and work on this CV, and yeah, bring this in nicely. I would have to obviously get rid of this last little bit. And there we go. I've now got myself a nice CV here. I can even, I'm going to just kind of dismiss that for a moment. I can even actually use Google Gemini Advanced inside this specific document. So I would even be able to say something like, well, look at this, a tracker table to help me apply for jobs. And now it's actually going to be able to, oh, we're still learning and kind of help with that. Try another request. Well, look, I'm going to go back and just say, rewrite the above in a more formal tone. And that's the kind of thing that we would be able to do. It's kind of quite interesting, all the different things that we're able to achieve there. Now, there are some other tools that we have. For example, this one is Claude, which I've done the same kind of thing. Claude is interesting because it will create something called an artifact, where I can see the document in real time. Whereas if I go to, for example, ChatGPT 4.0, we have some interesting things here, like, for example, the ability to customize ChatGPT and give it some information about me and my context, and also how I like ChatGPT to respond, like, for example, using British English. So all of these different models have different abilities and can do different things, and I would encourage you to try them out. I think now that we've had a little look, I'm going to go back over to our kind of feature presentation. So let me go back to, where is it, over here, LLMs in action. And just very quickly, we're going to say, first of all, yeah, hey, you're awesome. Way to learn something new and advance your skills. And just very quickly, going to hand back to Elias, who's going to talk us through just the next couple of slides before we round out with a very quick Q&A. So yeah, do go right ahead.
Thanks, Tom. Thank you, everyone, for getting through these slides on this generative AI class. We will appreciate greatly the feedback that you send us, and here's why. We are continuously updating these courses. As Tom said at the beginning, this content might be outdated in 6 months from now. We are continuously updating content, and we include trending tools, trending skills that are in demand, but also your feedback. So please share your feedback whenever you can. You have access to the slides via the link you received. There's also the link on the chat. You will also receive the recording via email. You'll see it on the YouTube channel by Google, and you also receive a link to the slides. So yeah, when possible, please share your thoughts. Thanks. Before we go into Q&A, some of the paths that students at GA usually take after a free class, if you want to learn more, there's 3 options. You can hop in a workshop where the outcome is, hey, you learn a basic concept with more training hours between 2 and 6 across 2 days. And these are live. All of these paths are live training. It's not on-demand content. The difference is that you get an expert like Tom there to answer any questions in real time. For a more in-depth career growth experience, you can hop into a short course. Students usually do that to either get up to skill in their job or to get promoted, and that's because they added a very specific skill like data analytics or Python or product management or visual design. These are 40 to 60 hour training courses, usually 10 weeks part-time, you work and study. And then there's the boot camps. The boot camps is what put GA and most of these vocational schools on the map, which is a 3-month full-time or a 8 months part-time experience, where it doesn't matter what background you're coming from, you will become job ready for a job in either coding or data analytics or data science or UX design. This is amazing because you go from zero to hero in 3 or 8 months with a portfolio of 5 to 6 projects that you can then show you the hiring manager of the job you want to apply to that you're ready for that job. All right, we can move to the next slide. I think we can hop into Q&A now. All right.
Yeah.
I'm going to be recapping the questions. First one I have from the chat is from Miguel that said, how do other companies like ChatGPT get access to all that information available on the internet?
Yeah, so we kind of answered that one a little bit already, but essentially it's through Common Crawl. It's through doing their own scraping of the internet, but it's also licensing content that is out there already, licensing content that is, if you like, on the deep web, that is not openly available on the web. And there are, again, lots and lots of open source data sets. Awesome. Next question. Let's keep them going really, really fast.
Awesome. William says, do you have a list of AI image generation suppliers?
Yeah, Midjourney is really awesome to kind of try out. You can also try out, I think actually ChatGPT 4.0 has DALL-E built in. That's really good. But I'm actually getting more excited about the next generation, which we should see come online. I would say in the next 2 months, we'll see some really interesting ones. So watch that space. We also had a question. Is it true that you can get better results if your prompts are more friendly and maybe even include a tip? Yes, weirdly, Katya, it is true. It turns out that actually if you put emotional pressure, you sometimes get better answers. This is one of the weird things. And it's because in the training data, you often get better answers in the training data. If, for example, there's something out there on the web where someone has said, look, I'll tip you $10 if you give me a good answer, we'll tend to have a higher quality answer coming out from that. So bizarrely enough, Katya, yes, that is true. We've also got Miguel, perhaps I missed it, but does the system, so Gemini, for example, keep track of your info that you share, also for future answers, like when saying you live in Singapore? So all LMs are starting to introduce this feature, but ChatGPT has something called memory. Memory essentially is this kind of feature where it will start to find out information about you over time. The only issue with that is sometimes it will add irrelevant information to your memory, and sometimes it may get a little bit obsessed with the information that you add. How can you check what is in your memory? You can just go to, if you have the paid version of ChatGPT, you can go to the section where it records what is in the memory, and you can actually see what's in there, and you can delete it as necessary. Okay, next question. Great. So yeah, what is the best prompts that you have ever done? So look, actually, some of the best prompts end up being where you are very, very specific about the output that you are looking for, and that essentially put the large language model into a particular role. So I have actually a really good prompt that I like to use a lot of the time when I am reviewing legal documents. And it means I don't always have to go straight to my lawyer straight away. And this prompt also is very good at explaining legalese in plain English. So I'd say that's probably my my kind of favorite prompt. We had a question about privacy, and I would actually like defer to running the LLM offline could be a good option if data privacy could be crucial. Yeah, how can you tell AI to keep data private? You can't tell AI to keep data private. You just have to look at the terms and conditions. I would say probably if you're using the paid version of ChatGPT, you would have to turn off the feature that allows them to train on your data. If you're really conscious about privacy and security, I would say you probably don't want to use ChatGPT. You probably want to use the paid version of Google Gemini, or indeed Anthropic Claude. Are the tools offering the same quality no matter which language I use? Katya, yes and no. So there are some tools, some models which work better in different languages. Mistral or Mixtral can actually sometimes offer better performance in French because it is very much a kind of French trained model, but it really does depend. You can actually like look at the ratings of different large language models at any one time. There's I think there's a website which is called Chat Arena, I think it's called, Chatbot Arena, which can show you at any one moment in time which models are scoring the best. So we've also got, how can you tell ChatGPT when they are clearly telling the wrong information? Is there a correction possibility? Yeah, so with any of these tools, you can actually ask it to search and to verify what it's written. If you want it to correct, you can use the feedback tool to say this was good or this was bad. So I can click on good response or bad response. But we are now at the top of the hour. We are at 1:30, and Sasha says I have to leave. Thank you very much. Katja, do you know which tool works best in German? I think actually all of the best-in-class models now are really, really good in German, and these differences are going to decrease over time. So I would just say use a best-in-class model. I don't speak German, so I can't speak to this from personal experience, but there we go. But look, we are now slightly over time. So Elias, unless I'm allowed to keep going with these Q&As, which I'm probably not, because we're on a strict time.
Right, I would encourage everyone in the audience, do reach out via LinkedIn, do connect with us on Instagram, or reach out directly to the General Assembly team. Thank you all for being here. Thank you, Tom, for sharing your insights, best tips, and experience here. And thanks to the Google team for bringing us together. Wish you all the best. Have a great week. Bye.
Wonderful stuff, everybody.